And welcome back in, everybody. Another edition here of Fridays with Phillip on the Auburn Undercover podcast. Nathan King joined, as always, by Phillip Marshall. No Ronnie this week, but we will press onward. And Phillip, the next time this episode goes out, Auburn will have already started up fall camp. Gets going next week on Thursday, August 1st. As usual, this offseason has sort of zipped by. And I think what I try to tell people sometimes about what we do and what I do is that it can feel like, I don't know how it is for you. It can feel like fall camp is almost more chaotic and busy than even the season is
Oh,
because there's
no
a lot
question.
less structure.
I've said that for years because it's every day. During the season, you got certain things that happen on certain days, but it's structured and but preseason camp, it's like I said, it's every day. It's not as hectic as it once was though, when it was twice a day every day. Uh, but it's still hectic and. But there's no question. I've always said that August is the most most demanding time of it all.
Yeah, and the season will get kicked off here at the end of August. Um, as we'll soon turn the page. So that'll be a quick turnaround for the staff as well. They got Big Cat weekend,
Yeah.
and then they gotta turn right around. Players report on Wednesday, and obviously they've spent the past couple months formulating their plan for what camp is going to look like. Phillip, as usual, all eyes will be on the quarterbacks and the Auburn passing game. Of course, wide receiver has garnered so much attention as a position group this offseason because of the upgrades they've made there. But Peyton Thorne's got to be good, and he has to run this offense well. Not that many people have necessarily pegged this Auburn team to be a championship contender this year, but whether it's what they've got right now, whether it's the efforts Hugh Freeze is going to make in the future with a 2025 quarterback, what have you. When you look back at the history of the Auburn program, sort of what has it taken to be a championship quarterback and to have those championship qualities of the best quarterbacks that have come through?
Of course, I agree with you that nobody's picking Auburn to win a championship. Obviously, they picked 10th in the SEC, but I promise you, Auburn players are thinking about winning the championship. Everybody can win the championship in July, and but to answer your question, it's really kind of interesting when you look back at it, and I'm going to go back a long way here. 1957, when they won the national championship, Lloyd Nix was a halfback in spring practice of 1957. He was a halfback, and the starting quarterback got kicked off the team. And so when they came back for preseason practice, he became a quarterback, and they went 10-0 that year and 9-0-1 the next year. He had 19-0-1 career record. And then you go on forward to 1983. Randy Campbell was he was like a 2-star signee out of Hartsville. Lifelong Alabama fan, only wanted to go to Alabama. They didn't offer him. And he signed with Auburn and Doug Barfield. And then in 1981, they moved into wide receiver, which was kind of interesting because he really wasn't all that fast. But and he played there for a while. And then in the spring, everybody was expecting Ken Hobby to be the starting quarterback. And he was the number one quarterback in the A-Day game. But that year, and he was awful. I mean, he just had a really, really bad day. And that year, they had another full-blown practice scrimmage after A-Day. And he had another bad day. And Randy Campbell ended up winning the job. And of course, he went 20-4 in 2 years as a starter and led them to the SEC championship. And a lot of people think national championship in 1983. And Reggie Slack was recruited as an athlete. Joe Witt, who was the linebackers coach, thought he was going to be a linebacker. And he tells the story, but they told him they'd give him a chance to play quarterback. And he tells a story about their first practice, I guess in the spring of his freshman year, or no, probably not, because they didn't have many early signings in. But anyway, after this practice, in the coach's locker room, Coach Dye told him, said, he ain't gonna be no linebacker, and he became one of Auburn's all-time best. He's the only Auburn quarterback to win two SEC championships and 10 games in back-to-back years. So you go on then to don't make sure I don't get confused here. Well, Stan White was a 4-year starter who led them to an 11-0 record his senior year, and then you had Patrick Nix, who didn't win a championship, but who was a very good player, and Valley. But I'm not going to try to name every single quarterback. But then, of course, Cam was everything everybody would ever want, and then Nick Marshall, who they don't go to they don't win the SEC championship and go to the BCS championship game in 2013 without Nick Marshall. They just don't. That was, of course, the last championship they won. They got to the SEC championship game in 2017, and Jared Stidham had a fabulous year in 2017, and is still playing. The point being that it doesn't have to be a guy that's going to be a star in the NFL, and that's what everybody wants. But the notion that you have to have that, well, it's belied by Stetson Bennett, belied by Jacob Coker at Alabama, and a lot of guys that either did nothing at all or nothing much in the NFL, but led their teams to a national championship. I think Jason Campbell. I left Jason Campbell out, by the way. That's a bad mistake. And he was a first round draft pick. But I remember him saying one day, I think it was during his junior year, he said, sometimes it seems like people think that the quarterback's the only player on the team. And what you got to have to win a championship is a great team. And it helps if you got a great quarterback, but you can't have a bad quarterback, but he doesn't have to be a future NFL star to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, that's what people are going to need to remember this preseason and this season. They've got nowhere to go but up in terms of a passing game.
And as far as Peyton Thorne goes, I have no idea what to expect. Maybe he may have a tremendous year, but or he may not. But it's going to take a whole lot more than just him. And it was a very difficult situation for him last year. He didn't come in until the summer. The wide receivers were a mess, and the offensive line was inconsistent. And then they did the quarterback musical chairs, and what was really difficult I think was probably as difficult as anything for him was, they'd put Robbie Ashford in on first and second down, then it'd be 3rd and 9, and they'd put him in. They'd put Peyton in. That's pretty tough. And I don't think there's any question he'll be better. I know that Ken Austin really believes in him, and because I've had conversation, I've never had a lengthy conversation with Hugh Freeze about him, other than what he said in public settings. But he definitely believes in him. So, and it seems like his teammates believe in him too. And he's got a lot more talent at wide receiver this year than he did last year. And I think a lot more. The whole thing last year on offense, there was the Phillip Montgomery, who was a great guy, and Hugh Freeze trying to kind of, I mean, combine things or whatever. It just didn't work. And Peyton took a lot of the blame, probably a lot more blame than he deserved. Not that he didn't have his his moments of failure, but he probably didn't deserve as much blame as he took. But of course, that, as he has said, and he's right, that comes with the position. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah, I wrote about Cam Coleman. We're recording this here on Wednesday. I wrote about Cam Coleman for our most valuable Tiger series that's coming out on Thursday, and just sort of like projecting his role this season is difficult. I think it's difficult anytime you have a true freshman. But it's funny though, Phillip. Like I personally am just not used to, maybe somebody like Derek Brown is the only example I can point to of a kid who comes in as a true freshman, and you're like, well, that guy should be awesome, like no question about it.
Right.
I guess just, what have you kind of seen from the freshmen who have come in over the years and done that really well right away? And what does it take for them?
Bo Nix was freshman of the year in the SEC. That same year, the defensive end, I'm going brain dead, Nathan. The defensive end that played with at the same time.
At Auburn?
Yeah.
I'm blanking as well, but I'm probably.
Anyway, I've seen a few.
I'll get it.
But there's I've seen
Derek Hall. Yeah, was Derek Hall a freshman?
No. I'm gonna feel stupid when I think of it, but
I'm sure I will too.
But there's been a lot of guys that have played a good bit, and some guys have been obviously a step above. I'd say these days you just about got to have some freshmen that play, and some of them are going to be a lot further along than others. But Derek Brown is probably the very best example, I would say, of a guy that just came in and was, especially for a lineman. Marlon what?
Marlon Davidson.
Anyway, but it just was physical for a interior defensive lineman. That's a challenge to be just physically ready for the grind and everything else that goes on from the start. Ed King was an offensive lineman in the 80s who was that way. He was a starter from the get-go and a very good player. I'm sure a lot of people come up with a lot of other examples, but being old, sometimes they escape me.
Yeah, it's so interesting because they bring in somebody like Lambert Smith, they bring in somebody like Robert Lewis, and still who you come back to is Cam Coleman. What can he do in this offense this season? I think there's no question. I don't know about no question, but little question that he's going to be a starter. I think being here in spring practice, I think people are going to realize even more how big of a difference that makes. Because Perry Thompson is really talented as well.
Right.
But as Free said at media days when he was talking with us, he's going to have some catching up to do. And it really makes a difference when you're here and you can develop that rapport with your quarterback.
And learn the offense. I mean, but Cam Coleman is clearly, and I agree with you that he'll be a starter. I mean, I guess it's possible they could start some upperclassmen in front of him in the first game, but he'll be, for all intents and purposes, he'll be a starter.
Right.
And there's no question he is a gifted young man. But you just don't know how anybody's going to respond when their last game was in high school to play it in the SEC. You can't ever be certain. But I'll be surprised, however, if he doesn't make a splash.
Speaking of that move from high school to college, I mean, Cam Coleman's the number 2 player in program history in terms of recruits. I wasn't covering the team at the time, kind of saw it from afar. What was the whole Byron Cowart situation like?
Byron Cowart, I went to Orlando, or Tampa rather, to Tampa and spent 2 days down there doing a story on Byron Coward. And he was a very impressive guy, But interestingly, this was before he got there. When I talked to Rodney Garner about him, he said, "Don't get carried away. He's got a lot of growing to do." And he did have, and then I think he got frustrated, and Rodney wasn't for everybody, and I mean, like a lot of guys loved him. Byron didn't, and I think it just didn't work out. And he went to Maryland. I guess he was a low round draft pick, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was pretty good at Maryland, I think.
Yeah. Well, he was a tremendously talented guy. There's no question about that.
Yep. And he just signed with the Bears, apparently. Also, as I'm looking up some stuff about him as you were talking, there's a picture of Cam Martin running the ball, and it says Byron Coward will transfer to Maryland. So make sure you check your pictures. Not all number 9 players are 5'10" Cam Martin is not Byron Coward. But switching gears a little bit, of course, we'll talk so much next week about fall camp. But to some other topics on the show here today, Phillip. Let's see. We have the report today from Ross Dellinger. We've mentioned it before about the revenue sharing, potential scholarship increases. The power commissioners, I guess all commissioners, they finalized the roster limits today. They're expected to be concrete Friday in a House settlement. We talked about that previously. For football, it'll be 105, or at least again, this is what's being proposed. Men's, women's basketball 15, baseball 34 scholarships,
Yeah.
softball 25, and volleyball 18. Just
18, yeah.
Phil,
I don't know about golf, tennis, etc.
Yeah.
Track. So because those are going to be part of it too. And first, I think there is some misunderstanding out there, whether it's the paying players or whether it's the number of scholarships or the roster limit. Nobody is required to do it. I mean, just because you can have 105 doesn't mean you have to have 105. Just because you can sign 34 baseball players to full scholarships doesn't mean you have to sign that many. And if you don't have enough money to pay your players, you don't have to pay them. And of course, if you don't, you probably don't have any players. But I think from reading that story and what I've heard in the past was that the estimate is it'll cost power programs around $30 million a year for both of them for the added scholarships and for the $20 million, $22 million, whatever it's going to be, they're going to have to pay players. And it's going to be very interesting to me because a lot of people are excited about baseball because, though I think it's overblown, the whole lottery scholarship thing is but you're going to now have everybody can have 34 players. That's it. And here's the other thing I think some people don't realize. Just now, these are all what's called contingency sports, including football, which means if you want to, you can give partial scholarships, but you still can't have more people than that number on your roster. So if you give the guy half the scholarship, he's still taking up a roster spot. It's not like you can say, "Well, we're going to get 2 for 1. We're going to sign him to half scholarship and him to half scholarship." Well, you can do that, but that's 2 guys on the roster, 2 roster spots, not 1. And I don't know, outside of the SEC and the Big Ten and some in the ACC, some in the Big 12, I don't know how many programs are going to be up to paying $22 million a year to pay players either. But here's the thing: if you're in the SEC, if you want to compete for championships, then you better do it. And that really is probably true in most sports, baseball too. You'd say, well, we don't really need to sign 34. Well, you might want to reconsider that because everybody else is going to be. Texas A&M is going to sign 34. LSU is going to sign 34, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing I wonder about is not, it's not like you're starting over every year. You still got your roster of guys returning, et cetera. But everybody's going to potentially have 20 more players on full scholarship than they have had. So for teams that are real recruiting powers, they're going to have 20 more. So those 20 guys, those last 20 guys, won't be going somewhere else, like maybe they would have in the past. And of course, there's a lot of things in this. The programs that are going to really take a brutal hit are the Group of Five programs, who already are struggling because when they do get a really good player, they lose him. And but that's going to be interesting to see for me. It's I don't know that it'll be all that noticeable, but I'll be interested to watch how recruiting goes next year. Of course, you can sign as many as you want to now. I'm right about that, aren't I? In a year,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how many you sign, but you can't go over that 105. And I guess you can have walk-ons if you're willing for them to use a roster spot for.
Yeah. So on that point, something that Ross Dellinger said today as well, the 105 may not be a requirement until the start of the season. That could give coaches flexibility to go beyond the 105 during camp.
Yeah.
Your point on signing as many as you want to. The NCAA max right now is 120, but nobody's gonna go that
No,
high.
I mean signing in a year.
In a year, I see.
Yeah, like he should be 25.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's the case anymore. But it's going to be like a whole lot of other things in this whole mess. It's going to be interesting, and I'll guarantee you. I mean, Houston Baptist, of all people, already tried to challenge the settlement and got rejected by the judge. And I saw a story about somebody today that's saying it's price fixing, and he's representing like a Vanderbilt player and an Ole Miss player and some tennis player and some softball player, all of whom I had never heard of, who, and he says they could get a lot more if there wasn't for this artificial price fixing. From what I saw, the players that he represents probably couldn't. But it's just like this whole house thing was the person they got to be the face of it was a former Arizona State swimmer. I mean, there's not a whole lot of money to be made out there for swimmers, I wouldn't think, unless you're really like a gold medalist or at least a contender to be a gold medal. But it's going to all be very interesting, and it's I think they're just kind of the commissioner said at media days that they're having to make decisions in a matter of weeks or months that normally you would take years to make, and I can see that, and there's these programs are not rolling in money as a lot of people seem to think they are. Like they just got a big old pot of money, they just reach in there and grab them another handful. It's going to be a real challenge, and not everybody's going to be able to meet it. Here, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, LSU. Only the top programs in the SEC they're not going to get left behind. They're not going to let that happen. But where it's going to get interesting is in the other sports. Do you let if you're an AD, do you let your baseball coach have 34 scholarships? I don't know. The others seemed a little bit more. I mean, 25 scholarships for softball, that's about a normal softball roster size. Of course, 34 is about a normal baseball roster size too, but it used to be they were scholarships were spread all over the place for those 34 guys, and they could still do it that way. But again, that's not the way to. That's not going to be the way to build a championship roster. I
Yeah,
don't
well, like
think.
I mean, like you said, it's just going to be where do those conversations of conflict and how do they happen? You know, like, hey, I'm this coach for this sport. I need more money for my scholarships. Like, how do you determine at the top in terms of your overhead? If you're an athletic director, you know, where does that sort of fall? Um, you know, and like you said, there are so many sports on this list that we didn't mention. You know, what do their scholarship situations look like? And all the while, you have the money that you have to pay, you know, in this settlement. And so,
Yeah, then
um,
you have to pay the money for the settlement, and then you have to pay. Uh, you know, you have to pay the players, and then you have to pay. You know, just like NIL now. I mean, it kind of goes on behind the scenes, but a lot of the recruiting that goes on now is convincing guys or giving them whatever you have to get them to stay that are already there, and it's just so totally different than what somebody like me, an old dude like me, has grown up with. It's just really strange. It's strange. I I have no problem with players getting something. But when you're talking about millions and millions of dollars and all this stuff, it's. I think it puts the whole enterprise at risk. I really do. But I've said that before, and I usually get shouted down. But I really do believe that because it just can't be. I just don't see how it goes on. I guess it can as long as the TV networks are coughing up what they're coughing up. But what happens if they all of a sudden they're not? There's no sign of that, but
right.
um, it's just it's a lot different than I was a kid. And there was one game on Saturdays. That was it. And then you watch on Monday Night Football, they would have highlights, college highlights at halftime, and that's about all you saw. But not that way anymore.
Yeah, I mean the TV contracts are obviously what's driving not everything, but a lot of it. It seems like a
No,
lot of it is carried by that. You know, I think the next domino to either fall or not fall is Clemson and Florida State from the ACC. What decision they make, I think every single commissioner this week you know, the last couple weeks when we've had media days has said, "Oh, we're comfortable with where we're at right now." Obviously, Big Ten is at 18 teams. You know, Sankey seemed to indicate that they were fine at 16, but um, you know, if Clemson and Florida State start messing around a little bit more, those are obviously you know
you know,
potential hot commodities.
interestingly enough, and yes, there'll be if they get out of the grant of rights, excuse me, if they get out of the grant of rights, then there'll be a whole big deal. I don't believe that Clemson and Florida State would be the SEC's top two. If the SEC, if the ACC blew apart today, I believe the SEC would have more interest in getting into North Carolina and maybe Virginia than Florida State and Clemson, who are in states where they've already got teams. That's what I've been told, but who knows?
Yeah, and it won't be this season. Obviously, it won't be next season either. There was that deadline with the lawsuits with them. So it could be at some point in the future. Like we talked about in last week's show, you know, Auburn has all these games scheduled. We saw the UCLA one get scrapped, but people like people like Miami and people like Baylor, programs like that, you just wonder if conferences continue to shift around what those games are going to look like. You know, you and I have talked about the potential of a 9-team SEC, and then what do you do with those 3 conference games, non-conference games?
Yeah,
Um,
well, it's going to be very interesting. I think you're going to find SEC teams if they go to 9 conference games, especially. You're gonna find a lot of SEC teams that aren't particularly interested in playing some big physical challenging game in a non-conference game. I wouldn't. if it was me. If you do if you play at a championship level on a 9-game SEC schedule, it's not going to really matter who you played otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming more of an NFL type schedule. So why would you want to?
It's becoming more like NFL in a lot of ways.
Yeah, why would you want to jeopardize that with a loss to some good non-conference team on the road or something like that?
Now you've got a 2-minute warning coming up.
Yep. Yeah, that'll be this fall, right?
The 2-minute warning was started at a time when they didn't have a clock. And now it's just it's strange. But it's going to be different. And now the 12-team playoff, that's going to be different. There's you hear a lot of people talk about like, well, you ought to be able to get in the 12-team playoff. Well, and really it's 11 right now because the group of 5 teams is going to be one of them. So an 11-team playoff, to be one of the top 11 teams in the country, you got to be pretty darn good. And that's 11 out of 130, however many. So it's not going to be like it's automatic now. And things, I think people fret about it, but things they will change. Georgia and Alabama are not always going to be where they are right now. Things change. They always have.
Yeah, you've got to be like, just looking back, here's last year's, the final AP poll, the 11 highest rated Power 5 teams were Michigan, Washington, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Florida State, Oregon, Missouri, Ole Miss, Ohio State, and then Arizona squeaked in. They won 10 games and beat Oklahoma. Those were all very, very good teams last year.
Yes,
so absolutely. I agree with you, because you hear people kind of throwing it around a lot. Oh, you can go 9-3 and make the playoff. Well, you could.
That's possible, but it better be a really good 9-3.
Yep.
Let's say if Auburn went 9-3 and lost really close games in Alabama and Georgia, and a really close game to somebody else, LSU,
Missouri,
somebody else, then maybe so. But just getting in because you're 9-3 alone, I don't believe that's going to happen very often. Of course, you may have somebody with 3 losses squeeze into a championship game and win it, and all of a sudden they're a top 4 seed.
Yeah. I will say I will be at least a bit more tuned in from week to week to the playoff rankings, because before I just didn't care at all until it got down to the top 4 late in the season. Then you're kind of seeing who's going to jockey there.
A lot of people were fearful that the 12-team playoff would diminish the regular season. To me, it's the opposite, because there'll be a lot more games that matter a lot later in the season than there were with a 4-team playoff. They'll still be, you'll be well into November, and there'll still be a lot of teams that are bunched together, probably. So I think it actually enhances the regular season. Again, we'll see. We've never experienced it before.
Yeah, I saw somebody talking about this the other day too, on that point of, you're going to be in November, and unless someone's like a runaway train from the group of 5 and no one can catch them, you're going to have 3 or 4 teams from the group of 5 legitimately believing in their building and being right. Hey, we can make the playoff. Like, last year it was the highest rated ranked teams in the AP poll. Like Liberty, Tulane, and James Madison were the 3 highest ranked teams at the end of the season. Like in November, those teams will be fighting for playoff berths, and that's just good for the sport. That's just good for the sport to have smaller programs like that.
I agree.
Phillip, another topic we wanted to touch on today. You and I have talked about this on this show here before, but sort of Auburn's, championship window. What do they want to move into? How fast can they move into it? Maybe it's not year 2, but I think a lot of people have the feeling that year 3, start to get your pieces in place, start to recruit, stack a couple top 10 classes. All of a sudden, Hugh Freeze is where he wants to be, and Auburn can kind of feel that they can get back in contention there. But it's not as simple as just saying that. It's not as simple as just recruiting. It's not as simple as just throwing together a staff. And Auburn, I think, has some unique challenges that Hugh Freeze is going to be facing in the next few years. In your opinion, Phillip, what is it about the Auburn job and the program that maybe make it a bit harder to kind of break through and enter that championship party as compared to some other places.
Well, as fans love to point out, one of it, part of it right now, is playing Alabama and Georgia every year, and especially in the even numbered years when you play them both on the road. But the bigger picture, the university of, and it may not always be, that may be the exact same thing. I mean, Ohio State, for instance, there's a University of Ohio, or Ohio University, and then there's Ohio State. Well, there's no question who the dominant power is there. But the state-named university has an advantage. That's been the case forever. Auburn, actually, the last time I looked, they were 14th in the all-time AP poll. In other words, that take all the polls together, they're 14th. And Notre Dame, you would think like-minded schools, Notre Dame was ahead of them, USC was ahead of them, but programs like that are different. I mean, USC's right in the middle of Los Angeles. Notre Dame's got a nationwide fan base unlike anybody else, and but Auburn has, and especially when you consider, 25 years when Bryant was there, and then 17 years of Saban, Auburn has held its own pretty well. And I wrote a column earlier this week about decade by decade. Auburn has had a winning overall record and a winning SEC record for 7 consecutive decades going into this decade. Of course, now they've had 3 losing seasons in the first 4 years of this decade. But it's just harder. And it becomes also harder by the modern era of TV networks, ESPN, I guess Fox Sports, so I don't watch it that much, focus a lot of attention on a small number of programs. And there is an even smaller number of programs that they focus on, even if they aren't any good. I mean, Texas hasn't lacked for attention for the last 10 years, but for 4 of those years, they had a losing record. And I mean, they were obviously very good last year. And same was true of Alabama. Same would be true of Ohio State. I mean, Michigan lost to Ohio State, 14 times in 15 years?
Something like that.
I believe that's right. And but that didn't reduce anybody from saying, oh my gosh, this is the greatest rivalry ever. So that's, and high school kids, high school players, they watch ESPN, and the overriding impression you get is, hey, if you're really good, you go to one of these schools, and you got to overcome that. And and then you just, the state named university again attracts more non-affiliated fans in your state. In other words, you took all the fans in the state that didn't go to Alabama or Auburn, probably more of them are Alabama fans. Well, not probably. There's no question that's true. And some of those people become wealthy and donate and all that stuff, even if they're not an alumnus. So you have to overcome all that. But and then the schedule. I mean, really, you can take whoever you want to. All those Clemson teams that won national championships, that competed for national championships, if they'd had to play Alabama and Georgia and LSU, et cetera, in the regular season every year, you think they'd have won all those national championships? There's no way. Bobby Bowden once told me at Florida State, he said when the SEC had invited them to join back when they first expanded in 1991, and he said his words to me were, "Why would I want to do that? So why would I want to go in there and fight that?" And they didn't, and they finished in the top 5 like however many consecutive years. Well, they couldn't have done that in the SEC. Playing an SEC schedule. So I think that's, but what's also different today is that Alabama and Georgia they have clearly somewhat separated themselves from everybody else. I mean, they lose every now and then, but they don't lose often. And but of course, now we don't know what's going to happen with Alabama. Maybe Kellen DeBoer is going to go and keep winning like he's won on the West Coast. You don't know, but Georgia shows those signs of slowing down, and when you have to play both of those on the road in the same year, that's pretty rough. Because probably the only way Auburn could get in the playoff, most likely, is if you lose to them, not lose anybody else. And that's a challenge.
Yeah, or beat one of them, which is also
which is certainly not impossible. But they haven't beat either one of them on the road since 2010 when they beat Alabama.
It's been quite some time.
And Gus, for whatever reason, could not score in the state of Georgia. He just couldn't. It's amazing when you look at it. He never scored more than one touchdown against Georgia outside of Jordan-Hare Stadium. Not one time.
It's just insane.
And not all those Georgia teams were great either.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, goodness. I remember the 2016 game.
Oh, that's one. Man, that Georgia team wasn't any good at all, really.
No, Jacob Eason.
They beat Nicholls State by 2 points. They lost to Vanderbilt. To me, I can't think of a worse loss in Gus's time than that one.
Oh, yeah, they didn't pick up a first down in the second half, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah. And they
not good.
They just couldn't. I don't know what it was, but I mean they usually played them closer in 2017, pull them out at home. But over there, including in the SEC championship game, they couldn't score.
Yeah, I just ever since I've been around the program, even my couple years as a student, and then starting to cover the team as a student, like I have become so accustomed to not just them losing on the road to those two teams, but just on offense in particular being just wholly uncompetitive. The Cadillac year at Alabama was probably the best example of them. They had some sparks offensively in that game with Robbie Ashford and with Tank Bigsby.
Yeah.
Other than that, I just can't remember much of anything. I feel like they were down 4 touchdowns at all times in those games.
2014, 55-44.
Yep.
And Nick Marshall had 600 yards passing. But they were ahead with halfway through the third quarter. But that's the only other time, and of course 2010. But yeah, I mean 2011 was 2012 was a blowout. 2014 was that game. 2016, I believe it was like I don't remember the exact score. 30-12, I want to say was the score.
I think that's right.
Pretty good, huh?
Yep.
2018 was a blowout in the second half, and then 2020 was also a blowout, and then Cadillac's year. So I guess that was 2000. Cadillac's year was 2022, I guess, right? Yeah, 2022, year before last. Yeah. And yeah, that's something that nobody beats those teams at home hardly ever, but Auburn needs to be competitive with them, and to a large extent, they have not been in recent years on the road. I'm talking about. They're almost always competitive against both of them at home, but and obviously they had Alabama beat last year, and then the play of infamy happened. But it's but at least to me, when you look at this season, if Auburn can just hold its own on the road against them, and who knows, if you hold your own, then maybe things go your way and you can win. that would be a big step in the right direction. I mean, you never want moral victories. That's not what I'm talking about. But they at least need to to show that they can look them in the eye, home or away.
Yeah, I mean that goes along with yeah, you're right. No moral victories, but I think if this team they need to show some proof of concept of adding these receivers mattered, changing up the offensive staff mattered, Hugh Freeze taking over a larger role in the offense, all that stuff mattering in the end.
Yes,
I think if that is the case, then they will go on the road and compete in those games.
right.
Um, but like I was just saying, I have no. If they go and score some points in both those places, it'll be a little shocking to me because I have just never seen those teams. I've never seen Auburn do it. It's crazy.
Yeah, it was. I mean, even the 2010 game. I mean, they were behind 24-0, and it would have been worse if it had not been for Mark Ingram's fumble that bounced 20 yards down the field into the end zone, and if Trent Richardson had not dropped the pass that hit him right in the gut in the end zone, it might have been over with. But in the end, it was obviously one for the ages that they came back and won.
Yeah. I bet that is. I mean, I just cannot. I remember I watched that game on TV, of course, but I cannot imagine what that place must have felt like that day. Both in Alabama, because I've seen Alabama fans talk about that game in the first half is one of the best environments that stadium has ever had.
Main thing I remember is it was cold. I mean, like really cold.
Yeah. Maybe that's why people were dropping passes and fumbling the ball.
And Auburn scored shortly before the half, and then early in the second half they threw a long touchdown pass, and all of a sudden it's 24-14, and it's not a blowout anymore. And Auburn really, Alabama really probably shouldn't have scored in the second half, and it was 24 to 21, I guess, right? All right. Yeah, it was 24-21, and Auburn fumbled. Interesting thing, Auburn fumbled the punt, but Alabama recovered it, and it was a punt they fumbled because it was a huge hit, but he should have called a fair catch. But anyway, but Alabama got the ball and went nowhere and had to kick a field goal, and then Auburn went back down the field and won the game.
Talking about Phillip, when you're talking about Auburn being able to break through and what's it going to take for them to break through. When you hear that phrase, or when you use that phrase, breaking through under Hugh Freeze, what does that mean to you? Like, what do you perceive that as in the Freeze era if they can get there?
I perceive it as here's something you have to remember before I answer your question. Something you have to remember. You talk about what it takes to win a championship. One of the things it takes to win a championship is just the bounce of the ball. I mean, Auburn doesn't win a championship in 2013 if a Georgia defensive back slaps the ball to the ground instead of tipping it up in the air for Tavares Robinson to catch it and win the game. But so that's one thing, because there's so many close games. And a lot of times things happen. It's not because of the coach. It's not because of anybody. It's just because it just happens. But I think for Auburn, I think that you would like to think you're in the at least in the hunt for the SEC championship most years. That you win it some years, and that, of course, and now when you do win it, if you win it, then you're going to the playoff. But even when you don't win it, that you have a legitimate chance to that you're at least competing to get in the playoff. It's kind of similar in a way to me to basketball. Winning the SEC championship is fun, but that's not really the deal. The deal is what you do once you get to the NCAA tournament. And I don't mean to diminish anything like Bruce has done or anything like that, but I just say, if I asked you today, If you ask me who won the SEC championship in basketball 2 or 3 years ago, I'd have to think hard about it to answer. So, I mean, and that maybe is a drawback of the 12-team playoff, is it becomes that being the only way you can succeed. And it really shouldn't be, because where it's different than basketball is there's 64 teams in the basketball tournament. But like we discussed earlier, to be one of 11 in this college football playoff, you got to have a really good team. You got to have a really good team. And I did something not long ago about the years that Auburn would have been in the playoff. And I'm not going to try to go back and think of all of them, but 2017, and you have to remember, losing bowl games you can't consider, because they wouldn't have been in those bowl games. So 2017, I don't think there's any question they were 10th in the final poll. 2013, obviously, and they were in 2010. That you go on back, probably 1997, they would have had a chance. They were 9-3 at the end of the season. That's going too far back. 2006, they certainly would have been there. They were 11-2 and finished in the top 10. 2005, the year after the undefeated season, they certainly would have been there, because they were 9-2 in the regular season and then lost in the bowl game. So they would have only had 2 losses, and they certainly would have been there. So, Auburn is probably should a lot of years be in that position. But it's a lot harder now too, because Oklahoma and Texas and coming into the league, it's going to make it harder. It just is. And you're going to have more competition for those spots. Haven't been there are. Let's say there's 3 or 4 spots. The SEC gets 3 or 4 spots in playoff in a given year, and so you got the champion, then you got Georgia, Alabama, Auburn, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Ole Miss, eventually Florida, LSU. I mean, that's a lot of teams fighting for those spots. So a lot of really, really strong programs. That's the thing that separates the SEC from everybody else, in my opinion. Really, there are 8 teams at least, and maybe more, in the SEC this year that you could make an argument could get there. And while the Big Ten is really strong too, they don't have that, and clearly none of the others have that.
Yeah, no. I mean, we're approaching if we're not already in it, the super conference side of things. Just looking
I
here.
think we're already in it, to be honest with you. I don't think that. I mean, probably there's probably one more period of upheaval left.
Yep.
But the whole thing, here's another thing people don't understand. Let's say Florida State said, why would you take Florida State? They got this, they got that, they got the other. Well, unless your TV partner is going to pay you enough that your current teams don't have their money reduced, you're not going to take them. And the ESPN is not motivated to get Florida State or Clemson in the SEC, because they already got them at a lot cheaper price.
Yep.
So, I mean, to probably within the next 2 years, the SEC is going to be getting $70,000 or $80,000 per program every year. So, if you were going to take Florida State and Clemson, then that's $160 million for 1 year. Just to break even, just to keep it where it is.
Yeah.
And that stuff like that is fine. I just wonder sometimes, it seems like somewhere along the way it's just going to break. I don't know, but it just seems that way to me.
Under the weight of all the money, probably. Yeah, I mean, you look at even just, I mean, we don't have anything to go off of right now, but like just ESPN's FPI, the top 10 teams in the country right now, just their off-season ratings: SEC, Big Ten, SEC, Big Ten, SEC, Big Ten, Independent, Notre Dame, SEC, SEC, SEC. And Florida State's sitting there at number 11. The highest rated Big 12 team is Kansas at number 16. So
yeah, the Big 12 to me, they got a lot of pretty good programs.
Yeah.
But they don't have a single program that makes people want to say, "Oh, Oklahoma State's playing today. I got to watch that." I mean, they don't. They're just all kind of ordinary.
Yeah,
And,
they have Utah that is better than people realize and has been for a long
Utah's
time.
not a big TV draw though.
No, and their coach is about to retire too, and so what will that mean for them moving forward?
Yeah, and it's but I will give them this. They've done a really good job, I think, of kind of coming back from the shock of losing Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah. Yeah, they've damage controlled pretty nicely.
Yeah, and whereas the Pac-12 didn't do such a good job.
You said they didn't get any big TV teams. They went and got Colorado. Phillip, come on now. It's the biggest TV team of them all.
Hey, that's one of the more interesting stories of recent years.
We went 56 minutes without talking about Colorado. It's probably a new record.
But I actually wouldn't be surprised if Colorado's pretty good, but I don't know that because, I mean, they got all these new players just like they did last year. Obviously, the quarterback's good. Wide receiver / defensive back is good, but do they have any other impact players? I don't know.
Yeah, some guys out of the portal, but who knows? I haven't even looked at their schedule to know what things could be like for them. Been too focused on it.
It's pretty tough. That's but then again, I mean, they're in a much more friendly environment in the Big 12 than they were in the Pac-12.
I click on Colorado's page here on ESPN to see their schedule, and one day ago, a video titled "Dion to USC, Stephen A. and Feinbaum debate Coach Prime moving to LA."
Yeah, I went 4-8 last year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even just like I don't know, like it was Big 12 media days. Their season's starting soon. Like, why is that? I don't understand why that is something. But whatever. That's whatever. That's fine.
Yeah, I can see. Think that when I hire Dion, to me, like Colorado's, is somebody that needs to find a way to get attention. I don't know why USC would want to hire Dion. That wouldn't make any sense to me. They just need to win. I can't hear you.
Oh, I was muted for some reason. I was saying I don't think people realize either, like how bad Colorado was too. Like when he took over, it's not like he took over a team that had much of anything, and then everybody left too. I mean, the entire.
But you know what? The most remarkable coaching story should have been last year. The guy that took over at Northwestern, who had never been a head coach, whose team was worse the year before than Colorado was.
Yeah,
won their first game, then lost 11 straight, and he went 8-5 and went to a bowl game with all the distractions going on around it. The coach getting fired, all that stuff. I thought that was a remarkable job.
Yeah, Northwestern is going to have one of the more interesting seasons this year because they're playing at their practice facility.
Yeah, that's going to be.
They're renovating it. 15,000 seats at their practice facility because they're renovating the stadium. But maybe I guess Vanderbilt. But speaking of renovations, since the home and away is going to be
done yet.
Sorry,
I read a story the other day that's still not done.
Yeah, I wonder if by the time Auburn goes back there in 25, surely ittle be done by then.
Sure, you would think.
So that'll be interesting. But all right, Phillip, I might have us call it up here. It was a fun show as usual. Hope everybody.
It's a pleasure, and always is. And I hope you have a great week. And I guess starting late next week, we'll see a lot more of each other.
Yep. It'll be good. Well, we appreciate everybody for tuning in today, and we'll talk to you all later.